The views and opinions expressed in the following paid pre-recorded program are those of the host, callers, and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of this station, its management, or its owners.
Securities offered through Kestra Investment Services, LLC. Kestra IS, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Kestra Advisory Services, LLC. Kestra AS, an affiliate of Kestra IS. Capital Advisory Group, Inc. is not affiliated with Kestra IS or Kestra AS. Neither Kestra IS nor Kestra AS provide legal or tax advice and are not certified public accounting firms.
You work hard for your money. For the next hour, you're going to learn how to keep what's yours. Capital Advisory Group presents Keep What's Yours. Here are Josh Gilbert and Jeff Zufall.
Well, hello and welcome to Keep What's Yours. I am Josh Gilbert, sitting here with Jeff Zufall. He is the Senior Tax Strategist and Wealth Advisor with Capital Advisory Group. And Jeff, full disclosure, you are my Senior Tax Strategist and Wealth Advisor.
Yes.
And no complaints.
None.
You know?
None.
So it's one of these things where I talk about it, every so often, but just mentioned it throughout the week, was doing the Heidi Glaus show with Bob Ramsey and Josh Gilbert, and we were talking about you.
All good, right?
Big Fed rate cut.
Yes.
That's going to be the bulk of our show today. But I had mentioned sometimes it's really helpful to have your financial advisor also be your tax guy.
It works very well.
Because number one, you save yourself a trip.
Yeah. Well, you save a trip, phone call. Your advisor may trade something or say, hey, this is what we're going to do. You need to talk to your tax advisor. You call your tax advisor. It takes them 4 or 5 days to get back to you. And then they're like, oh, my God, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a
crazy.
terrible idea.
Terrible idea. And then you got to go back to your advisor, and you go back and forth, and then you get conflicting results. And again, no offense to the CPA world, but most of the CPAs are very conservative individuals. It's just their nature. That's what they're supposed to do. So there may be stuff out there that the tax advisor don't understand. I shouldn't say don't understand. They don't get the concept behind it, and vice versa from a standpoint where the brokers are like, hey, I made you money. The bad side of that is you have to pay tax on that money. So the question is, how much tax are you going to pay?
And it's one of these things, and I could probably just boil it down to this. Your financial guy says, hey, this is going to make you a lot of money. And I'd say, well, how much tax am I going to incur on that?
Yeah.
Because, I've been doing this show long enough with you to know that everything that you do in life
has a tax consequence.
I could be walking down the street and all of a sudden be accruing taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I find a $20 bill on the street.
Supposed to report it.
Technically, you're supposed
Nobody's gonna, but
find a quarter. I'm not going to pick that up. I don't want to.
That's right. Don't want to incur any taxation.
Don't want the tax hit. But essentially, everything that you bring in, they're only taxing a portion of it.
Yes.
So if you find $20, your tax burden is going to be $4.
Yeah, 10%, 12%, depending on what your tax bracket is.
Right.
Yeah.
So you pick the $20 up.
You pick it up and
still
say thank you and stick it in
walking
your
away
pocket.
with $17.
Yes.
But your financial advisor says, "Hey, do this. You're going to it'll make you a lot of money." And I say, "Well, what's the tax hit going to be?"
Exactly.
And he's going to say, "I don't know."
Yeah, I don't know.
Call your tax.
Consult your tax advisor.
Why would I want to do that when I could say, "Hey, Jeff, I'm thinking about doing this, and you can tell me this is how much you'll make.
Yeah.
This is how much you'll pay in taxes.
Exactly.
This is a good thing. This is a bad thing. Or let me show you how you can do what you want to do, but in a better, more tax-beneficial way."
Yeah, more efficient way, possibly.
More efficient way. So why not have your financial guy also be your tax guy?
Yes.
And that's Jeff Zufall. Capital Advisory Group, CapitalAdvisoryGrp.com. Give them a call, 636-394-5524. Boom, that's just one benefit. One of the many benefits. And that's why I go to Jeff, and that's why I push my parents to go over there as well. And I think Heidi's in there now.
Yes.
So, it's a family affair.
That's right.
All right. So, something happened last week.
Yes. Our friends at the Federal Reserve came along and they decreased our interest rate, what's called the Fed funds rate, by 0.5 percentage point.
Now, was that bigger than what we were expecting?
So, out of all the economists, everyone said that it was going to be 0.25 point. And J.P. Morgan was the only company or economist that said it's going to be a half, and they were right. So
Who's J.P. Morgan? Is that
J.P. Morgan, the bank?
yeah?
Yeah.
Is that
They have a whole team of
that
economists.
Jamie Dimon guy?
Yeah, Jamie Dimon's the
Okay.
CEO,
Yeah.
and they have a whole division of economists and planners, and so we kind of lean on them for a lot of their advice.
So did somebody call them up on Monday and say, "Hey, what's coming next"? You know,
No, they should.
Nostradamus over here.
So no, they're looking at data, and they may have somebody on the inside that said, "Oh, it's going to be a half." You know.
Oh boy.
So again, the question of the day is this: is either the Federal Reserve sees that the U.S. economy is about ready to walk over the cliff, or it's a little political, and that's the question of the day, and we don't know. And again, typically, if you go back in history, most all of rate decreases on average are a quarter of a point. And that seems to be the norm in the past. And again, if you go back in history, a half a point for the way we sit today has seemed very aggressive. And again, we're, a month and a half from an election, and you go, ooh, that's tricky. But look at it this way. Maybe they see something that we don't see. They're supposed to be the smartest people in the room, and they are saving us from something because the Fed is looking a month, 6 months, 6 years down the road, and they're trying to manipulate the economy to function correctly. But what if they said, hey, if we need a quarter point, but we're going to add a quarter point to it, and we can just kind of levelize the markets for the next 30, 40 days right up to the election and keep it from the volatility kicking in like in the past. So that's the question of the day out there. Nobody really knows. And we'll see as we go forward closer to the election what takes place.
So is this something where, like in sports, the game's over and the sideline, reporter comes up to the star quarterback? What happened out there? Are they leaving the Fed building in D.C. and there's reporters that, why'd you go the full half instead of a quarter?
There is a 18-hour interview after the announcement where the Fed comes out and gives this dissertation on why they did what they did. And
tell me how boring that is.
It's they even do the blips on like CNBC or Fox Business.
Like it'll pop up. They just said this.
Just give a 15-second little discussion of what they talked about. But if you went to one of the finance shows or even C-SPAN, you'll have the whole 8-hour dissertation where they just blabble away. Most people would literally fall asleep listening to it. But they give their reasoning on, and they really don't play their hand as to, hey, this is where we're going and this is what we're doing. This is why we did it. And then people take that dissertation and dissect it and say, this is where the Fed's going to go next, and they get into that kind of stuff.
So after they hiked the rates up because inflation is running rampant, they wanted to
combat
cool off
inflation.
Yeah,
Yes.
they wanted to cool off the economy. Let's put it in terms that a simpleton like me can understand. They hiked the rates up to try to cool off inflation,
Yes.
off the economy.
Slow the economy down.
Inflation has come down. Now,
yeah.
as we talk about all the time, somebody's yelling at their radio, Josh, have you been to the grocery store lately? Okay.
Been there, done that. Yeah.
What's done is done.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
kind of like steps.
Yeah.
The prices will never come back down.
They won't come back down to where
Which
they
is
were.
sad
Yeah.
because, why did they go so high?
Yes.
Things at the grocery store have doubled.
Yeah.
I mean, did their shipping costs double? Did their
in some
production
cases,
costs double?
In some cases, to their defense, international shipping, after COVID, during COVID, and right after COVID, some of the shipping containers that used to cost $10,000 to have it shipped internationally went to $50,000. So yes, that was that, but that was part of that supply chain issue, so on and so forth. But that stuff's kind of subsided to a degree today. But again, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So
the costs will never come back down. But as far as inflation is concerned, that's what the Fed's looking at. Inflation has cooled off considerably.
Exactly. And there's a lot of factors that go into that math calculation on what are they really looking at for inflation? Ex food and oil, but that helps levelize that number as you go forward.
So if they see something out there that, inflation is cooling, what we've done is working, why wouldn't they just want to, slow and steady, go the course?
So that's the
make
question.
Such
Yes.
a drastic move. And somebody says half a point. somebody at home is probably saying, I wish they would have come down a full point or 2
So
points.
here's a little history in our history. If you go back to 2008, which was the market crash, if you want to call it that, in October, first week of October, they went a half a point. That was October of 2008. And anybody sit back. If you're driving, keep your eyes open, but don't go into hysterics. That was where the world really came to a screeching halt over, from early spring. By October, it was full rage, crash, if you want to call it that. So on October 8th, they dropped it a half a point. October 29th, they did another half a point. And on December 16th, they did a full percentage point.
Wow.
Now, you got to realize the bottom of that market collapse was March 9th of 2009. So as the market was imploding, they were trying to cut interest rates as fast as they
Soften
could to
the
spark
blow.
something.
Yeah.
So you go, a half a point. And then if you go back to the start of COVID, March 3rd of 20, they did a half a point out of the box. That was the first week of COVID when it kind of like just showed up.
Yeah.
And then they came back March 16th, so 2 weeks later, and they dropped a full percentage point again. So historically, there's been some serious economic turmoil that we were in when they dropped a full half a point.
Okay, so that's
so you go. It doesn't look like it.
That's kind of scary to me.
Yes.
If 2008 they're dropping half points because we're in dire straits and they see something coming, why would they drop a half a point now? Do they see something
that
coming
that we don't see? And that's the question of the day. Or is it a combination of, yes, the economy was slowing to the degree that they needed to kickstart it, and knowing that every election cycle that we go through, within a month, 2 months of an election, all of a sudden market volatility kicks in, which means it doesn't mean that the market's crashing or doing anything. Just somebody says something, markets drop 1,000 points. Somebody says something else, they go up 2,000 points. Next week, somebody says something, it goes down 1,000. That market volatility has been subsided so far for right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if that holds on, up to the election, and we can take it from there.
And the economy, I always compare it to a train.
Yes.
Going way too fast, you can't slam on the brakes. You'll derail.
Yeah.
So you got to slow down slowly. How about this? It's like a bicycle. You don't want. Have you ever gone real fast on the bike downhill and you're like,
Yeah.
uh-oh, I'm going way too fast. This is dangerous. But if you go too slow on your bike, you're going to fall off. You
exactly.
fall off. So maybe the Fed is saying, we slowed this down. We don't want to slow it down too much.
Well, and that's
then we'll tip
the,
over.
The soft landing.
Mm-hmm.
So they talked about a hard landing, which means they just totally missed the mark and the economy blows up, which would have been, like in 2000, maybe 08. But they're saying that we were heading for a soft landing, which again, you're threading a needle on the economy. Could they really pull it off? I mean, so far so good. So we'll have to wait and see if this was the right move or not. I'm not going to, dispute it by no means. They're way out of my league. So,
well, how about this? We're going to go to commercial break, but when we come back, what does the rate cut mean to me as far as mortgage rates, auto loans, credit cards? How does that work? What does it mean to the banks? We'll get into that in a second because you were trying to explain it to me off the air, and I was like, you know what? This is really good. I think I'm finally getting it, sort of. But when you look at what the Fed has done since COVID, since the bottom fell out, would you say that they have done a good job or as best as they could to?
I'd say that I think they did as best as they could, but they did a good job kind of keeping us afloat. You got to realize in 2008, we went to zero interest rates. I mean, literally, we hit the floor. They couldn't go any lower.
Man, I'd like to buy a house then.
And again, by rights, you can't have a negative interest rate. It doesn't exist.
They pay me to buy my house.
Mathematically, it became a negative interest rate for years. And they didn't really mess with rates at all until 2 years ago.
But when it comes to a negative interest rate or a 0% interest rate, that's going to ding me if I'm trying to invest my money.
Problem is for a dozen years, if you were a fixed income investor, you could not make money. That was the problem. You were forced to be a stock investor, whether you wanted to be or not, to get a dividend or something a little bit better. Savings accounts or money markets paid you, 0.25% a year, which is crazy.
And when inflation was going wild and the interest rates were super up, you could invest your money.
Oh,
into,
at 5.25, 5.35, somewhere in that range. You could get CDs for 12 months at 5. I think the highest we saw was 5.41 or something like that, and that's all kind of tapered back a little bit now.
Yeah.
With the anticipation that the Fed will cut rates. They meet again in November, week after the election, and the odds again are saying they're going to cut rates. Nobody's really saying what, but lean in on a quarter, so we'll see.
All right. Well, we'll talk about what the Fed rate cut means to me, my house, my auto loan, my credit cards, what it means to the banks, and how those two work together, hand in hand. But let me give out the number again. Jeff Zufall, 636-394-5524. He's my senior tax strategist. He's my wealth advisor. He can be both for you. Save yourself a multiple phone calls.
Yes.
And just make one call to Jeff, 636-394-5524, or go check him out online at CapitalAdvisoryGrp.com. What does the Fed rate cut mean to me? We'll find out right after this.
Keep What's Yours continues with Josh Gilbert and Jeff Zufall.
Back on the show, Jeff Zufall. He's my senior tax strategist. He's my wealth advisor. He can be yours as well, helping us keep more of what's ours, whether that's April 15th or right now, October 15th.
That's right. It's coming around the corner.
Extension deadline is nearing. If you had an extension, you better figure it out
quickly.
Yeah, your second deadline is coming up.
Yes.
So hopefully you had paid something.
Yes, something
back on
in
April 15th, and you're just trying to get your paperwork together now. But you help us keep more of our money every year come tax time in April, but every time I get a paycheck, which we just got paid yesterday.
Yeah.
Yes. Every time I get a paycheck, I'm keeping more of my money on my paycheck.
Yes.
Because of the different things that we have worked out with you, and all it took was going in and seeing you. The first time I brought in a couple of years' tax returns, a couple of paycheck stubs. My wife brought her stuff in. You kind of looked at it and said, we could do this, we could do that. And then you worked with, technically, I think my wife is getting all the tax benefits. But frankly, she makes more money. So we worked some things out, set them up. They're cooking. They've been running for a couple of years now. We're good. So not only are we saving money every year when it comes tax time, but every paycheck, I could see a little bit more on there.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have it on my paycheck than to go out to the federal government.
Exactly. And it's money that you never see ever again.
And here's the bullet points. It's all legal.
Yes.
It's all legal, people. In the written in the tax code are a couple of, there's a lot of stuff for rich people and corporations.
Yes.
But a couple of pages towards the back.
Yeah, a little bit. You get a little index for us.
You, me, and the rest of the listening audience, a couple of fun things that they stuffed in there for us. And if we're not taking advantage of it, we're giving more of our money away to the government that we just don't have to.
Yep.
Now, rate cut part 2. We found out what the Fed did. Now, what does it actually mean to me? What got cut? Like,
so it's
actually not like all of a sudden my mortgage payment
drops by 0.5 point.
Right.
By no means. So you gotta take this into consideration as what this really is. Fed funds rate, which is what was just declined by 0.5%, is what banks loan money to each other overnight. Okay. So the Fed fund rates is running somewhere between 4.75 and 5%. They give themselves a quarter hedge, if you want to call it that. But that's only if they're loaning money back and forth. That's not, we go to the bank and go, hey, I want your rate. They're going to laugh and say you can't have it. What we get is what's called prime rate. So prime, typically if you bought a house, or I should say a car, a house, something like that, they clock it as prime plus something. So prime plus a point, whatever the case may be. But then you go, well, wait, a mortgage, as of last week, mortgage rates were running at 6.5-ish, 6.6, somewhere in that range. Mm-hmm. And you go, well, why is that lower than prime?
Yeah, prime is what right now?
Right now, prime is 8% even.
8%. Like if I go to the bank and just say I want a $10,000 loan.
Personal loan, whatever the case may be, it's going to be prime plus 10 points, whatever.
Right.
It depends upon the risk that the bank is taking.
Mm-hmm.
So prime is 8%.
Prime is 8. Mortgage rates are 6.5.
Exactly.
Well, how does that work out?
So mortgage rates are based upon the bond arena. So bonds are what really predict they could push that interest rate higher or lower. So the side effect is if the Fed funds rate comes down, hypothetically, the yield on the U.S. Treasuries go up a little bit, technically, and the price comes down. So the theory on it is as those bonds move, the mortgage rates really are not tied to this like to a T, nor are your like a rate for a car. I mean, that's going to be prime plus something. And then credit cards literally are prime plus 100. So, I mean, most of them are, I think the highest is 32% they can charge you on a credit card.
Oh, my. Yeah.
But
Sometimes
again,
it feels like they're doing
it
that.
feels like it. But
Yeah.
but again, that will change instantly when rates come down. But they're still, so if you would say, oh, I had this credit card bill, but I paid it off, you'll feel a little bit of relief by that half a point, but you're not going to feel like, hey, look, it just saved the world.
So the credit cards are adjustable.
Yeah,
The
they're
auto
variable,
loans,
which means it
yeah,
depends
variable.
literally on a weekly basis, I think, is what they clock their calculations. But typically your auto loan's fixed. So it's going to be a fixed rate for that term. There are very, very few variable auto loans out
Can
there.
I refinance my auto loan?
You could, but again, you got to remember in an auto loan, the way that they set those payments up, the first year and a half to 2 years, basically interest that you pay all your interest on the front side of that. So to refinance that loan and reoccur those interest rates, it'd have to be a substantial decline in interest rates from where you came.
Okay, so there's a couple of things moving around here. When the Fed announces the half-point drop, that affects Fed fund rates. That's what the banks trade with each other.
Yes.
So I don't have anything to do with that.
Nope.
But
it does push the bond market.
It creeps back up.
Yeah.
My mortgage rate is different from prime.
Mm-hmm.
My mortgage rate is controlled by the bond market. The bond market is affected by the Fed funds rate.
Exactly. And your mortgage also depends if you are shopping for a home today. Yes, it's gonna vary on you. That's why they'll lock you in so that you know exactly what your rate that you're going to get is going forward. But if you already have a home loan, I'll say the bulk of them are fixed rate, so it's not going to change. And that's the time that you would refinance. Mathematically, you say maybe a half, maybe a full percentage point different than what you currently or lower than what you have currently makes sense to refi.
Right.
Typically.
If they dropped it a quarter,
really, most times it's not going to mathematically to go through what you got to go through, unless it's like a free, no charge, closing, then a quarter point would be worth it.
Yeah.
But today, typically, it's a half to full percentage point before you say, hey, let's refi.
So you got Fed funds, that's the banks. You got prime, that's me. If I wanted to take just a loan out, the mortgage rate is controlled by the bond market. The bond market is affected by the Fed funds rate. So they're all kind of separate, but they all work
interrelated. Yeah, interrelated,
together.
but different at the end of the day. So it's not like you're going to see rates drop a full half point 2 minutes later.
What was prime? Prime is the money that I can borrow at personally. What was prime, a couple of years ago when the mortgage rates were, 3.5?
So again, the prime was like 5.
5, okay.
So the funniest is in the history, and I say our history, the last, 60, 70 years, what do you think the highest prime rate ever got to?
If it's 8 now, I got to imagine it couldn't have gone much higher. 10?
How about on December 19th of 1980, it was 21.5%. That was prime.
Whoa.
Yeah. So again, mortgage rates were probably a little bit lower than that because, again, they're based upon the bond markets. So it's not prime
What
per
was
se.
going on in 1980? Was this the oil embargo?
No, that was basically we had a very, very severe case of inflation, as bad as what we just went through. And not to say it's going to repeat itself, but they raised interest rates over the late 70s. They got them up to where they were, 8, 9%. And then a gentleman was running the Fed named Paul Volcker, and he said, all clear, we're good, no inflation, we've taken care of it, and we're going to decrease rates. And they started to drop interest rates. And then a year later, they came back and went, oops, inflation's back. And it's back with a vengeance. And they had to go on another rate hiking event, which took them in maybe the 6.5, 7 range. And then poof, we were at, high 18. If you ask anybody today 60 or older, 65 or older, and ask them, hey, your first house, what'd you pay in interest? They're going to say 12, 14, 18%. And you go, what? But again, take that back to 1980, early 80s. The value of a house then versus the value of a house today, the average house was 40 to 60,000. Today it's 450.
Yeah.
So you can't afford, 18% interest on a $450,000 loan. It's mathematically impossible.
Right.
But you could
And
squeeze it on a 40 or 50.
If the interest rates were at 18%, people wouldn't be buying $450,000 houses.
Yeah. Well,
They might have to cut prices on the houses.
Well, that if we went to that, they'd have to, because it would bring it to a screeching halt. Everybody's ticked right now that they don't want to pay 6.5 because we're accustomed to being a 2.5.
Yeah.
And so you go, well, I'm not moving.
I will never move now that I got a 3% interest rate.
My
I'm not
rate
going
is
anywhere.
Dirt cheap.
Yeah. Honey, dig in.
Yes, that's your stock here. So
yeah. Hope the schools are good.
Yeah. And again, the question would be is, well, you say you stay there forever. Will rates ever come back to where they were? I'm not sure they could get that low unless we, again, went to zero. And I don't think we want to go through a 2008 again to get there.
But maybe my personal situation changes. Maybe, I have a bunch more kids and I need
if it's different
to
if
move.
you need to move or you're forced to move, that's different, and you just have to pay it. So yeah.
Or if I just want to move, for that lake lot.
That's right.
Holding out for that lake lot.
They got alligators in the water and sneak up in your backyard.
Oh, yeah. Well, everything comes with a cost, Jeff. Did the Fed back in the day in the 80s, not to call out Paul Volcker, I don't know where he is today, but did the Fed make a big mistake?
They did in the 80s, but again.
Was it a huge blunder? Did people come back and say, what a bunch of boneheads?
Yes, but it was after the fact. And again, you got to look at it from access to information or access to data. You would hope that the Federal Reserve are the smartest people in the room today with data that we can't get access to and our interpretation of data that we can't get access to. And back then, technology wasn't what it is today. So you say, maybe they had one hand tied behind their back while they were trying to run the economy. So for the benefit of, sake of the benefit, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Is this immediate? I mean, this happened last Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
Is this like I go to the bank right now, or the mortgage rates have already been adjusted?
And that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's the funny part is the mortgages were already starting to price this in. So they knew they knew a rate cut was coming. So the bonds already started to adjust. And by that adjustment, then the mortgage rate started to come down. They didn't know exactly whether it was a quarter, half, whatever, but they were working on it as we went
Is
forward.
the mortgage rate automatically tied to the bonds, or do the mortgage rates look at what the bonds are doing and then make a decision?
Yes. So it's a combination of a few different bonds that are put together, and whatever that math is how they move on a daily basis.
Okay.
So
it's just fascinating to find out what the Fed did, how it affects the banks, how it affects me.
Yeah.
Is it immediate? Does it take time?
Exactly. And again, if it's played if you just caught it on TV and they said, hey, they dropped the rates a half a point, you think, hey, rates went down a half a point. It's not a direct correlation to us.
Right.
So.
And I'm not bragging. I got lucky. We're at a 3.5% mortgage rate. I'm not bragging. We got lucky. But when this drops, everyone's like, oh, the mortgage rates are down. And I'm like, yeah. And I look at it and I go, well, it ain't down.
It's not. And again, the problem will be is to get back to the 2.4 mortgages. The only way we're going to get there is if the markets implode and they have to drop rates from where we are today to zero and go through that cycle again. And they'll come back down to.
So realistically, if everything goes according to plan, I will not be moving. I will not be, refinancing my house.
If you did, you pay 6. Maybe they come. I mean, the kind of the gauge they're saying 5.5-ish is kind of going to be the norm going forward.
Yeah, this cash out option is not for me because now my mortgage is now $1,000 more than it used to be.
Yeah.
So I'm all for what the Fed did, but as far as mortgage rates are concerned, if you got in at 3.5 or 4 like me,
and the other side of that is the most people, it used to be the old saying is have more kids, buy a bigger house because you could deduct all that. And then in 2018, excuse me, the SALT was kicked in, which state and local taxes, which means really nobody, they cap your state and local taxes at 10 grand. Part of that is your mortgage interest that you pay. It's plugged in along with your state tax, but you're capped at $10,000 and that's it. So in the past, you could write off, or I put it this way, the federal government helps subsidize everybody to buy a house because you got a deduction on that stuff.
I could write the whole thing off.
You'd write the bulk of it off. But in today, you can't do that. Now, there has, again, it goes back to the flippity-floppity of an election cycle. Trump brought up 2-3 weeks ago to repeal SALT, which he put in play in 2018, which is state and local tax, to repeal it. And when they put that in play, 85% of America can't itemize anymore. You just take a standard deduction, which is good because you don't have to add up a bunch of junk when you do your tax return.
Yeah, my
makes it super simple.
Nike box,
yes,
receipts.
Receipts going, hey, I got this, I got that. But now he's brought that to say, hey, maybe we repeal SALT. So again, it's that, we're on the election cycle and we're going to say all kinds of crazy stuff, but really not put a true policy out there.
But here, full disclosure, neither side, neither party has really given a tax plan.
A true in writing, here's what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it.
They'll be at a campaign stop, and they'll say, no taxes for
on tips.
For the
no
for the
tax
servers.
on Social Security and this and that. And
But we're going to repeal SALT. Yeah. The child tax credit.
Yeah, it's gone.
They throw it out there.
$3,000 to $7,000 to $6,500, but nobody's really put it in writing and go, hey, that's what we're going to do.
Put it on paper.
Different story. Because
So
then they got to hold to it
I
if they
stick with it.
win, because
Yeah.
people are going to come back and go, hey, you said that.
Right.
So
No new tax. Read my lips.
I saw that as a little blip a week or two ago. They brought that up. And said,
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I remember that.
Well, hey, it's fine and dandy what you say behind that podium, but once you put it down in writing,
It's a different story.
and
so
that's probably why neither side has put it down in
from
writing.
a PR standpoint,
what their tax
yeah.
plans are just yet. So
Yeah.
it'll be.
But it does make it confusing for us to sit back and look at what is your tax policy.
Yeah.
And you go, well, they said this, this, and this, but what are the odds it's ever going to happen?
Now,
So,
I'm voting on tax policy. Well, what's their tax? I don't know.
don't
yet.
know.
So, all right. Well, we'll see how that all shakes out. But the Fed cut 0.5 point. How does
Yes.
that affect our mortgage rates? How does it affect prime? If I was a bank, how did that affect me? So it all puts everything in perspective. If you want to get the nitty gritty with Jeff Zufall, I'm sure he'll get down in the dirty with you. 636-394-5524, explaining this stuff in a way that even I can
That
understand.
it makes sense.
That's how Jeff works with you. Capital Advisory Group, CapitalAdvisoryGrp.com. And again, give him a call, 636-394-5524. We'll take a break, and when we come back, I want to ask about Roth conversions.
Okay.
Do I do them when I'm older? Do I do them when I'm younger? End of year's coming up, and we always talk about the end of year planning.
Yes.
So when do I do a Roth conversion, or do I wait until I'm getting closer to retirement? We'll touch on that really quickly after this.
Keep What's Yours continues with Josh Gilbert and Jeff Zufall.
Good show today. Josh Gilbert here, Jeff Zufall, senior tax strategist and wealth advisor with Capital Advisory Group, giving you the lowdown on what happened with the Fed, why they did what they did, still kind of out there.
Yeah.
They hold their hand close to the vest. But what does it actually mean to you and me, boots on the ground, when I walk into a bank and ask for a loan, when I go to get a house or try to do a refi? What does that mean to me? My credit cards, my auto loan. Auto loan's generally fixed.
Yeah,
but,
typically.
What does it mean if I wanted to buy a car now? Is it cheaper? So all good things. And if we are clients and we call you up and say, hey, Jeff, I was kind of waiting on the fence to see what would happen. Is there, now that they dropped 0.5 point? And look, 0.5 point is what it is. But like Jeff said, it's one of the biggest drops.
That we've had in a while. And usually we were in dire straits economically
And they
when
needed
they
to.
did that.
Which is kind of scary because I'm like,
Because you
well,
go, well, it's coming down the road.
what do they know that we don't?
Exactly.
Why'd they make such a drastic cut? But 0.5 point, I mean, that when it comes to a mortgage, depending on your $300,000 house, that could be another $100.
Yeah, it could be $100 a month, $80 a month, something like that going forward. So
Yeah. So the question is, Is there anything I could do to take advantage of this?
Yeah. Well, if you looked at your mortgage and you said, hey, I got X rate versus X rate, what is the difference in monthly payments, versus what's my closing cost to refi it? That's the question. If there's no cost refi, every nickel you save, do it. Don't even hesitate. But if they charge you $800 or $1,000 to do the paperwork, you got to back that in and say, hey, I'm saving $50 a month. It'll take me a year and a half to recoup my closing costs. How long are you going to stay there?
All right, yeah.
There's the math and the stuff you put together.
I've got a question, and I always ask Jeff about my harebrained schemes, my money making. Most of the time, he says, "Josh, flat out, that's just
don't do that. You'll go to jail."
Yeah, that's number one. That's dumb. Number two, that's illegal. But what about this? What if I have my house paid off considerably, and I actually refinance for a higher rate, but I get $200,000 out.
So that's a HELOC. So what you would do is apply for it. You only pay interest on the money that you actually use. So the problem is they say, hey, that's a cash out type of a situation, and the banks will say Prime's 8, we're going to charge you 9.5.
Okay.
It's Prime plus something. So you will pay dearly for that money. Now, that's something that we would put, if you were getting ready to retire, you're 6 months from retirement, your house is paid in full. As an emergency fund, we'd say, hey, go do a $40,000 line of credit. Don't touch it, but just have it open.
Just have it there.
In case there's an emergency, you need access to cash, you could write a check for it, like right now today. So again, that's kind of what you'd use it for. In the past, you could get a line of credit for, I remember at one of the local credit unions, it was 2.99, first year fixed. But today they're literally 9.5, 11%. Just depending upon your credit rating, has a lot to do with that. But again, that is something, if you need access to cash and your house is paid for, you could do a line of credit against it. And then anything that you borrow. So you could open the line but not borrow any money, and you don't owe any interest until you use that line. So
when it comes to Roth conversions, I was thinking about this earlier today. I have made a decision to do half and half.
Yes.
Every paycheck, I put half into a Roth and half into a 401k.
Yes.
And this is coming off of your advice in the different buckets. Put some money in a Roth, put some money in a 401k, put some money maybe into the open market.
Yeah.
Maybe have a little cash on hand just in case you got to pay for something. But I am doing all this planning for, the future.
Yes.
And I am still relatively young in my 40s.
Yes.
When it comes to year-end planning, and we are, in October, basically.
Yeah, it's here.
When it comes to year-end planning, when I'm still in the accumulation phase, do I want to start doing Roth conversions at the end of the year?
Technically not. And the reason being is you're playing the game where we've already allocated this out, ran the projections and said, hey, if we do 50-50, 50 pre-tax, 50 after-tax in the Roth, when we get out to retirement, you have the best of both worlds, because you now have two buckets of money. One is tax-free, one you're going to pay tax on. And your required minimum distribution will be age 75, according to the tax laws today, unless they change them. So again, you go, hey, I'm not forced to take money out of this IRA until I'm 75. So if you went at 65, 67, 70, you still have time to take that IRA dollar and do conversions on your own at a later date. And you're already retired, so you don't have your day job income counting against you.
But theoretically, my tax rate is as low as...
hypothetically as low as it's going to go. Now, again, over time, will tax rates go up? They have to. I mean, they have to. For the situation the United States sits in today from our debt, that's the other problem, is neither one of our elected officials have talked about how are we going to solve the national debt? How are we even going to make a dent in it? They've avoided it like the plague. So again, you go, hey, taxes have to go up just to help pay for that over time so we don't run ourselves into the ground.
Nobody wants to be up there stumping, saying, vote for me.
Yeah, I'm going to raise your taxes.
I'm the guy that's going to raise your taxes.
Yes. Yeah. And they know it. That's just, you can't. somehow somebody's got to creatively come up with a way to explain this to everybody and say it's going to hurt, but we'll get through it. But if they keep going at the rate they're going, it's just going to get dumber and dumber as we go. So
but on the ground level for the year 2024, every time I get paid, I made a decision to do half and half. I put 6% 401k pre-tax in the whole. I'm 24% tax bracket.
Yeah,
or at least I was last time I checked. I put it in there pre-tax. Hopefully, that when I go to take it out, I'm at 20% or something.
Yeah,
right.
Just a little
So
bit
it
lower.
Just doesn't make any sense for me to put it in there pre-tax, and then come October, November, December,
Take it back out.
out again. My rate's still
Exactly.
the
So,
same.
and again, the concept would be is we have your plan put in play. You do half and half. You move forward, and around 55-ish, 60-ish, somewhere in that range, we start to calibrate that to say, is it still going to stay 50-50? Do we move it 70-30 one way or the other? And that's the game that you get to play. That's the versatility of it.
What's the one more time? What's the 59.5 or 5 years rule?
So that's for like a Roth. Anything you put in to get you could take your principal out second day out of a Roth, no question, no tax, no nothing. But the earnings have to stay in there until you're 59.5 or 5 years, whatever's longer.
5 years what?
From the day that you make your first contribution or you open the account, hypothetically.
Oh, okay.
So that's where it's saying, but it's whatever's longer. So if you're 40 and you open up a Roth and put money in, yes, you put $1,000 in. You could take your $1,000 back out and not pay tax because it's after-tax money. You just can't touch any earnings on it until you're age 59.5.
That earnings will still make earnings,
Yeah,
but
on top
it'll
of
go
itself.
at a much
slower pace because it's
yeah.
compounding interest.
Sure.
But now in an IRA or a 401k, it says, hey, you can't touch this money until you are age 59.5. And if you take it prior to that, there's a 10% penalty.
That's pre-penalty, taking it
for
out early.
whatever you're taking out, and that's prior to 50. Once you hit literally your birthday, which is 59.5, the day after, you can access your IRAs, 401ks. You're going to pay federal tax and state tax, but you won't pay that 10% penalty.
And is that something where, even if I'm working still, because I got to imagine, you joke with me all the time, I hope you're joking, that I can't retire until I'm 75.
Yeah.
You've seen my finances. Is that something where even if I'm still working and it's Roth and the taxes have already been paid on it, could I take that out?
Yeah.
And, even
Exactly.
though I still 9 to 5,
Yeah.
Monday through Friday, but I
it's not
still have
taxable. So they'll kick off. Here's where a lot of people run into this snag. See it all the time when it comes in, and you took money out of a Roth. You took $10,000 out of a Roth. The problem is the 1099. That's how they report your distribution from your Roth. Checks a box and it says taxable amount not determined. Okay, and it just says you took $10,000 out, and it's got a code on it for a Roth. The problem is if you plug that into a tax return, it's going to automatically make that $10,000 taxable. What that tax return's looking for when you put the $10,000 in, it's looking for a basis, what you either converted or you contributed to a Roth over time. And your tax return is the keeper of that basis. So whether people realize this or not, if you said, hey, I put $2,000 in my Roth 10 years ago, and it's now grown to $10,000, when you go to take that out, it's the principal. So the $2,000 you get back because that's what you put in. And if you're under 59.5, you can't take out the other $8,000 because it's earnings. But that's kind of the level. So we see that all the time where we plug it in and go, oh, that's totally taxable. They've never told us that, hey, I converted money in the past or I contributed in the past. So we go back, get basis, plug it in the tax return, and it becomes tax-free.
And there's a reason why I put it in there in the first place. It's for my retirement.
Exactly. Yeah.
So taking it out while I'm still working.
But in some cases, from a grandparent's gift, from a parent's gift, if a child has, and I say a child, they have to have earned income to be able to make a contribution to a Roth. Mm-hmm. But if they have a side job in high school and they make $1,000, you put $1,000 in a Roth. Concept is it's after-tax money, and then they let that cook in a sense until they're out of college or in their mid-20s, and they need to buy a house. There's their down payment.
Yeah,
if it has that design allocated to it. But you can't for For Finn, you couldn't go, hey, I'm going to put $5,000 in a Roth because he needs $5,000 of earned income to be able to contribute
count for it to count.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's all very interesting how it works, and frankly, I'm just wondering if when I turn 59 and a half and a day, if that's when I can find. Honey, I can get that boat.
That's
now.
right.
Jeff said I could get the boat.
And usually I get that phone call, and they're like, well, and then when I look it up, I'm like, no, don't do that.
Get the call from the spouses.
In the past, you used to say, go take a loan because it's dirt cheap. You make more in the open market, borrow the money, use somebody else's money for that. But today, it's kind of tricky because you go, hey, you're going to pay for that boat. You're going to pay 8% interest, so,
And look, that's why Jeff is here, because he tells you, hey, remember that harebrained scheme you had to get that boat? Here's the right way to do it
yes.
when it comes to your finances, when it comes to the federal government's taxes, and when it comes to your personal plan. And, Jeff, I'm sure you ask people this all the time. What are you saving for?
Exactly.
Why are you doing this? Why did you get into that stock?
The question is, what is the purpose of this money?
What is the purpose of this money?
And then people go, and I get that weird stare. They know, but they're like afraid to say, oh, this is for X. And again, if you said, hey, this is for a vacation home, we got to make sure it's in the right account. There's no right or wrong account, but from a tax angle, from a performance, or a degree of risk, all that stuff comes into play.
Well, I'll call you later this week, but let's just go ahead and write down, let's earmark some of that for B-O-A-T, boat.
A big one.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm not in my 80s. And
you can't even get on it. You're like,
All
wait,
aboard!
I can't step in. Yeah.
All right, well, Jeff Zufall, Senior Tax Strategist and Wealth Advisor with Capital Advisory Group, explaining the rate cut, explaining how it works with Prime and our mortgage rates and our credit cards, explaining how it can work in your situation. Is there a way to take advantage of this Fed rate cut? Let Jeff take a look at your finances, at your tax returns from a couple of years, at a couple of paycheck stubs. You and your spouse bring your stuff in and say, Jeff, how can we make this half-point drop work for us?
Yes.
And he can walk you through the process. 636-394-5524, or go and visit him online at CapitalAdvisoryGrp.com. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Keep What's Yours with Josh Gilbert and Jeff Zufall, Senior Tax Strategist and Wealth Manager at Capital Advisory Group. To learn more, call 636-394-5524 or visit CapitalAdvisoryGrp.com. The views and opinions expressed in the preceding paid pre-recorded program are those of the host, callers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of this station, its management, or owners.